How did Desmond Ridder handle the blitz? What's up with Richie Grant? But the big focus of today's Locked On Falcons is going to be talking about Tyler Allgeier and whether he's the RB1 the Falcons can build around for the future.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, and a.k.a. the most humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family. And today's episode of Locked On Falcons is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. You just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. Hey guys, we thank you for making a Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. Of course, it's free and available Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube, and you get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And make sure you check out Locked On Sports Atlanta, which Locked On Falcons is part of, on your Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Just download the Locked On Sports Atlanta app. You'll get Locked On Falcons, Locked On Hawks, Locked On Bulldogs, ATL Day Ones, all on your Roku, Amazon Fire TV. So, guys, today's episode, we'll talk a little bit about some of my observations rewatching the game on Monday morning. The Arizona Cardinals game where the Falcons won. We'll talk a little bit about Desmond Ridder later in the episode. We'll talk about Richie Grant, but I want to sort of start the conversation talking a little bit about Tyler Allgeier. And I have to say up front that, this conversation, I'm sure some of you will think is part of an agenda, and I don't really have an agenda. This is part of my Bijan Robinson agenda. And while I think Bijan Robinson is a very talented running back, arguably a quote unquote generational talent at the running back position, that word is oft, thrown around too much. But, I think he's one of the more deserving players that has earned that title over the last 15 years of me watching running backs. But then again, I also thought Trent Richardson was on that level, so it's by no means a foregone conclusion. But I do sort of put Bijan in sort of a comparable tier as guys like Adrian Peterson and Zeke Elliott, and could see him as a player that could be our Derrick Henry. But unlike Derrick Henry, Bijan has 3 down value, so he's more comparable to Zeke or Alvin Kamara or Christian McCaffrey. Right. And, the whole Bijan Robinson thing, for those of you that aren't clear, it comes from a tweet I had 3 weeks ago where someone asked me who the Falcons would take. And I said, they'll take Bijan Robinson. A lot of people thought I was kind of trolling with that. And, I wasn't then. But, now I kind of am, just sort of seeing how crazy the timeline went with that idea. But it goes back to a conversation that we've had with Jarvis Davis here on the podcast about this regime valuing skill players over sort of trench players. And so understanding that and seeing that as a reality, I sort of was like, I think I could definitely see them, going after a player like Bijan, especially if they go out and get those trench players, say in March in free agency, and then go BPA in April in the draft or whatever. I don't think that's a crazy thought given their track record, but obviously others may disagree with that. But I think part of the reason why, especially in the 3 weeks since that tweet went crazy, I think Tyler Allgeier's performance has led to more people thinking that's a crazier idea than it was seemingly 3 weeks ago. And I understand that, right? In the 3 games since that tweet, right, Allgeier has 296 rushing yards, and that's the second most in the NFL behind only Cam Akers. That's ahead of guys like Nick Chubb and Alvin Kamara and Christian McCaffrey, right? And so clearly, Allgeier is playing well, in part due to he reads the tweets and he's been inspired by my Bijan Robinson conversation. But I think he's playing well, but one wonders, or at least I wonder, does his performance over the last couple of games, clearly the production is there that makes him look like an RB1, but do you guys get the sense that he's an RB1 when you're watching him, right? And I don't necessarily get that sense. And again, I know some people are like, again, you've been hating on Tyler Allgeier since we drafted him. This is all part of your agenda. But what I want to say about Tyler Allgeier is, let's start with the positives. I think he's absolutely been playing great football for the last month or two. Right. You saw against Arizona. To me, what Tyler Allgeier really brings to the table is that short yardage ability. That late in the Arizona game, there was like a 3rd and 3 on the final drive that the Falcons needed to convert in order to set up the game-winning field goal. And Allgeier sort of lowered his shoulder, ran over a defender, converted, and we have seen consistently in the last month or so those types of runs: 2nd and 4, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. Like Algiers, the guy that you want in those situations to kind of lower the shoulder, ram it in there, run over a linebacker, lean forward, and convert those situations. It goes back to what I talked about when we drafted him. And I was like, he's a grinder type of running back. And I think he has certainly lived up to those expectations. And I don't want to paint him as exclusively a short yardage guy, but I feel like that's where he really kind of shines the most in those situations. We need 3 yards here. Give it to Tyler Allgeier. Let's get those 3 yards or whatever the case may be. So I feel like he's gotten better over the course of the season. The other positive I will say is I feel like the other areas that I didn't think was that impressive when I talked about him post-draft, the quickness, the speed, the burst, the vision, all those various things. I think those things have gotten better as the season. We saw a couple of plays against the Cardinals where, he showed really good footwork. And that was something I talked about, when we drafted him. I was like, I don't know if his footwork's great, but that's something I've seen other running backs improve upon. And so I wonder if Allgeier will be one of those guys that improve upon. And based off of, where I thought he was 6 months ago coming out of BYU and where he was at least against Arizona, it looked like those was another area that he's improved upon. But I still look at the production. I say, okay, the production's great, but is there anything sort of special about him? Because every running back in this offense has been productive, right? And it goes back to a conversation we were having in the middle of the season when we were doing Q&As, and a lot of you guys were like, yeah, I think, you were asking me, Caleb Huntley's better, right, than Tyler Allgeier. Why aren't we giving Caleb Huntley more of the football? Now, since then, Allgeier has stepped it up since we had those conversations. But you look at success rate, right? And for those of you unfamiliar with success rate, it is, to me, a better way of measuring running back efficiency than yards per carry, right? For example, success rate basically treats every yard as not being equal, right? And yards per carry will tell you that a 7-yard run on a 3rd and 11 is better than a 2-yard run on 3rd and 1. And that's not true. And, you'll look at if a running back had 2-yard run, a 2-yard run, and a 20-yard run, yards per carry will tell you he's averaging 8 yards per run, but you wouldn't necessarily know that. And success rate is a better job of doing that. And so success rate, 40% is okay. Success rate good is 45% or higher. 50% or higher is very good. And anything above 50 is great. Right. And you look at the success rate of all of our running backs this year. Patterson is 60%, Huntley is 61%, Allgeier is 54%, and Avery Williams is 50%. And again, going back to let's say week 8, the first 8 games, when a lot of you guys were asking me questions about is Huntley better than Allgeier, right? Midway through the season, you go back to week 8, through the first 8 games, Patterson had only been healthy for 4 of those games, but his success rate at that point was 67%. Huntley's was 60% and Allgeier's was 43%, right? Which is just basically league average, if you would say, right? Now, since Patterson's come back starting in week 9, that's really where Allgeier is really taken off. And his success rate in the last 8 games is 61%. Huntley's is 63 before his injury, and Patterson's has been 56, right? And this goes back to a conversation we were having last year where I think a lot of people, to me, overrated the difference between Patterson and Davis. And I was looking at it, and I'm looking at the numbers, and I'm like, the offensive line is the problem, because Patterson's success rate last year was 43%. Mike Davis's success rate was 42%. It didn't really, overall, it didn't really make a huge difference in terms of who was carrying the football, because the offensive line was the problem. Now, that's part of the reason why, you can make an argument we don't need a Bijan Robinson, because you're looking at all these running backs, having success rates above 50%, 60% or higher this year. And so that, to me, is probably the best case you can make against using a premium asset, like a first round pick on a Bijan Robinson or some other high profile running back, just because this year shows that the offensive line has flipped the script, right? They've gone from a team that was, basically league average at best in terms of their running efficiency to one of the most efficient rushing teams in the league. And that's more on the offensive line than the quality of the running back. But that gets back to Tyler Allgeier, where over the weekend, talking to some folks on the Discord, shout out to the Discord, but, someone said, compared Tyler Allgeier to Michael Turner. And you guys know me, that's my bat signal, right? To where, when I hear Falcon fans overrating a player, I go like, what's going on? And that's for the video listeners on YouTube. You saw the Michael Keaton bat signal scene from, I think, Batman Returns. And that's my signal. When I think people are overrating a Falcon player, I got to go out there and gentrify the neighborhoods with my fists, just like Batman. And during the Discord conversation, I was sort of holding my tongue on it, but it kind of leads me to the question I have for you guys today. Like, do you see Tyler Allgeier as that type of player, as an RB1 in this offense? Do you see him as our version of Michael Turner, our version of Zeke Elliott, our Derrick Henry, our Nick Chubb? Or are you more in line where I kind of see Tyler Allgeier is more like he's the Mark Ingram to the Alvin Kamara? He's the Mike Davis to the Christian McCaffrey. Maybe he's better than those guys, but he's more of the sort of complementary player to the sort of the focal point of your offense, not necessarily the focal point. And I'm curious if you guys have a similar viewpoint. So I asked you to leave a comment. I asked you to give me your feedback via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Hit me up on the Discord, the link in the description below. You can also hit me up on social media, Twitter, Facebook at Locked On Falcons as well. Like, where are you guys at with Tyler Allgeier? Right? Do you think he can be, what he is can be more than what he is, a RB1, or is he just kind of like a high-end RB2? He's like the best RB2 in the league, or a low-end RB1. But do you think he has that potential to be one of the better running backs in the NFL based off of what you have seen this year moving forward? So I'm curious about that. And those are also the places you provide that feedback. Those are also the places where you can ask questions for tomorrow's Q&A and all 22 review. And during that, we'll probably look at Desmond Ridder deeper, as well as the defense. But we'll talk about a little bit about Desmond Ridder and his performance under pressure in this game, as well as the pass rush in this game, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. But first, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Prize Picks, who are giving us a fun new way of playing daily fantasy. You just pick 2 to 5 players, and if you score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money, and it takes less than 60 seconds to enter. And the great thing about Prize Picks is you're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections. And they not only offer projections on the NFL, but there's NBA, there's MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, and so much more. You got esports, all that and more. Prize Picks is safe, it's fast, it's easy. It's currently in operation in over 30 states in the US and Canada. All you got to do to play is download the Prize Picks app, or you can go to prizepicks.com to sign up. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON. That means if you deposit $100, they will give you $100 to play with. So don't forget to use that promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And guys, I want to thank you again for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast as your second listen, so that you can get all the lowdown on the biggest stories in the NFL. Monday shows, you get the game-to-game episodes, breaking down all the weekend's action. Friday shows are the NFL key predictions. And of course, they have great shows between Monday and Friday. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So let's look at a little bit of the PFF grades from this Arizona Cardinals game in week 17. And let's talk a little bit about Desmond Ridder handling pressure. We've touched upon this a little bit with the PFF grades with Ridder under pressure. And that's been something that's been better under Ritter than it was under Mariota, depending on how much stock you put in PFF grades, right? So PFF charted Ritter as being pressured on 31% of his dropbacks, which is not as good as some of the recent weeks, but still decent, still on the right side of, say, 33 to 35%, which is, anything more than that is you're struggling up front. Below that, you're doing an adequate job. And Ritter's passing grade while under pressure this week was 74.4, which was the 4th best of all quarterbacks in week 17, not counting, of course, the Monday night game where we're recording that before that game has been played. And what's also notable is the Cardinals blitzed on about 65.5% of Ritter's dropbacks, and Ritter earned a 66 passing grade on those blitzes. And that was something that we talked about earlier with Ritter starting, is these last couple of games against teams that were much more likely to blitz him, like the Ravens, like the Cardinals, like the Bucks. How would he handle that? Would that be something that he would struggle with? And it seemed like at least against Arizona, that was mostly a non-issue. And, when you look at Ritter's season overall, right? These grades are an improvement, showing some of that progress that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. And overall, his grade under pressure is about a 64. His grade when blitz is a 58. You compare that to Marcus Mariota's grades. He had a 45 or 46 grade passing grade under pressure and a 59 grade when blitz. So roughly even with Mariota overall across the 3 games in terms of blitz, but much better when under pressure than Mariota was, in large part owed to, I think, some early season struggles from Mariota. So it does seem like Ritter is trending upward, and that is going to be something that we may not have to be as concerned about as we were, during the summer. That was one of our bigger buggaboos about starting Ritter too early, because we didn't know if the offensive line could hold up and how he would deal with that. Now, speaking of the offensive line, some of the other things that stood out to me in this game, looking at some of the PFF stuff, and we'll focus mostly on Kaleb McGary, because we got to be here on Kaleb McGary Island. But PFF charted him with giving up a sack and a hurry for 2 pressures, and this was only the 4th time this season where McGary has given up multiple pressures in a game this year. Right, this is the first time since week 10 that he's given up multiple pressures in a game, that second Carolina game. And that's an interesting flip from last year, where there were only 4 games the entire year where he didn't give up multiple pressures, where he only gave up 0 or 1 pressures last year. That was only 4 times. And now it's 4 games where he's given up 2 or 3 pressures. Right. And so as someone who is, the self-described head of tourism here on McGary Island, a lot of people over the last week, or in really months, have constantly been hitting me like, would you resign Kaleb McGary? Right. Of course, my opinion as the head of tourism is the most crucial opinion. Like, are you going to continue to advocate for people to vacation on Kaleb McGary Island? And, my stance has kind of been like, I don't know, as I've been all along, I've been kind of an unwilling resident here. Right. I can kind of go either way on it. And recently there was a contract extension for Jack Conklin. He was one of those potential plan Bs for the Falcons if they don't resign Kaleb McGary. And Jack Conklin from the Cleveland Browns, same age as Kaleb McGary, signed a 4-year, $60 million contract, so about $15 million a year. He got $14 million guaranteed at signing. There's another $16 million in guarantees that kick in this March, so he's really getting $30 million guaranteed. And when you really break down the contract, it's really a 3-year, $46 million contract. That's basically the Browns basically are locked into 3 years of Jack Conklin for $46 million at this rate. So, that's kind of the market, presumably, for Kaleb McGary, you would think. And so if the Falcons were to give him that, then that would keep McGary here through his age 30 season. So he would be at that point in time, coming out of that 3rd year of that contract at the same age that Jake Matthews is right now. And, unlike Jake Matthews, who I think probably has a lot more left in the tank, I wouldn't necessarily be that sold, at least sitting here today. We'll see, how things go, that McGary would have, many more years left in him. And that's in large part due to the fact that, Jake Matthews is such a technical offensive lineman. And so therefore you're less worried about that declining with age, where, McGary's technique has certainly improved from where he was when he started out here. But like, he doesn't win solely off of technique. Right. And so you do worry a little bit more like what's going to happen if that athleticism starts to decline and where he would be. So, when I look at Kaleb McGary, he has an 86 grade right now, right, which is one of the highest in the league, in large part due to his run blocking grade. But this is the first year that he's graded above, according to PFF, above a 65. And you compare that with Jack Conklin, who entered the NFL, I think, at age 21 or 22. So he's been playing a lot longer. But every single season, he's graded out above a 65. And so if Jack Conklin is worth that type of money, $15 million a year, based off of their overall body of work, I don't think Kaleb McGary is worth that type of money. And so ultimately, if you ask me, would I keep Kaleb McGary? It kind of depends on the price, right? Like, it's similar to the kind of conversation we had last offseason about Foye Oluokun. Go back 2 years ago to Austin Hooper. It's like, depending on the price point, like, I would pay that for that, but a certain price point, I don't know if he's worth that type of money. And I don't remember the exact figure it was with Oluokun, but it was like, I want to say like 8 to 10 million, like, oh, I'll pay Foye that type of money. And then he winds up getting 15 on the open market. And it's kind of a similar situation with McGary. And I would probably argue among that trio, I feel like McGary compared to Foye Oluokun and compared to Austin Hooper is probably a lot easier to replace than those two guys are, even if those two guys play non-premium positions. McGary plays a premium position, but I feel like he's not a premium player at that position. If you get what I'm saying. So if we'll see how the Falcons handle it. I expect the Falcons to make a competitive contract offer to Kaleb McGary. I don't know if it's going to be $15 million a year. And so if Kaleb McGary's out there, and him and his agent are asking for $15 million a year, and they're able to get that on the open market, more power to them. I have no problem with players securing the bag. And I know for Kaleb McGary, he's publicly stated that when he retires, he's going to basically build a doomsday shelter and go off the grid. And so if getting, $46 million over the next 3 years funds that enterprise, hey, more power to you, Kaleb McGary, do you, right? And so for me, I just kind of look at it and I'm like, I think there will be draft options for the Falcons in that event. I feel like you can, I haven't done the full study of this draft class, but I've seen a couple of guys that I feel like are day 2 prospects that I could certainly make a pretty compelling case for being worthwhile picks for the Falcons in the second or third round that could be adequate replacements for Kaleb McGary. Because again, go back to McGary's draft evaluation. He was drafted in the first round, but he was probably widely considered to be more of a day 2 talent in that regard. So I feel like the Falcons have options there. Maybe, everybody's talking about trading for Lamar Jackson. I'm like, hey, call the Jets and see, what are they looking for a conditional pick for maybe Mekhi Becton? That would be something worth exploring if we were talking about reclamation projects, not calling Lamar Jackson a reclamation project, but that's how I kind of think. But we'll leave the offensive line conversation aside and we'll flip the script to talk a little bit more about the Falcons pass rush. Looking at David Blau and how much he was pressured in this game. And the Falcons pressured him, according to PFF, on 32% of his dropbacks, which was 14 out of the 44 dropbacks he had in this game, which is a big improvement from last week where they only pressured Tyler Huntley on 4 of his dropbacks. Granted, he only dropped back 18 times, so that was still a pressure rate of 22%, but 32% is a much healthier pressure rate. And it was nice to see that, at least based off of the PFF grades in charting, because as we talked about, this Arizona offensive line seemed to be vulnerable. And so it would be very, very disappointing if the Falcons could at least break into the 30% pressure rate in this game. But one of the things I noticed about this game is that you look at the Falcons pressured Blau on 14 dropbacks, but they were credited with 16 total pressures. So multiple guys got pressures on a couple of those plays. And Lorenzo Carter led the team of 4. Grady Jarrett had 3. And of the remaining 9 pressures, 5 of them came from linebackers, corners, and safety. So that's a reflection of the Falcons' blitzes being a little bit better at getting home, something that has been a problem for this team throughout the season. So I'll be curious when I watch the film tomorrow and chart the defense to see if anything else stands out, and we'll potentially break it down on tomorrow's episode. So look forward to that. But we will leave that aside. And one of the things I'll be looking at when I chart the all 22 is paying attention to a particular play where Richie Grant seemed to leave his corners out to dry. We'll talk a little bit more about Richie Grant and what his future is like and what the future of the Falcons safety position is as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But first, I want to tell you about betonline.net, the #1 source for your sports betting info, stats, news, analysis, and yes, podcast, since I know you love podcasts. And if you're looking for this week's line for the Falcons, they are surprisingly 3-point favorites against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at home. And that line actually opened up with the Falcons being 7.5-point favorites and has moved now to the Falcons being 3-point favorites, which basically is telling you BetOnline thinks that Tom Brady is not going to play in this game, right? But that line movement is like, okay, well, there's a chance that maybe Tom Brady will play in this game, which is why that line has moved so much. But if you want to get the latest odds on that action, jump in on that action, or you want to get the odds and trends for every professional or amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer to esports, you got it covered at BetOnline. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. And the question I have for you guys is, can your portable speaker hang with the big dog? Big Dog is giving you a portable Bluetooth speaker specifically designed from Augusta, Georgia, that's going to deliver huge, clear sound, extraordinary battery life, and tons of connectivity options at a great price. If you're partying with friends or you just want to take or make a phone call, Big Dog's speakers are built to do it all. It's backed by a 100% satisfaction guarantee plus a 1-year warranty. So go big with the Big Dog Scout is their inaugural model. It includes a max volume of 105 decibels, 40 watts. It's waterproof. It charges other devices. You can get 15 hours of playback, and you can even pair two of them for enhanced stereo sound. I got two of my Big Dog Scout speakers hooked up to my computer for that enhanced stereo sound. So now order yourself the Big Dog Scout, available now online at bigdogspeakers.com at $99, and you guys can get $20 off with the promo code Locked On. For more info, just visit bigdogspeakers.com. So, guys, let's wrap up today's Locked On Falcons talking a little bit about Richie Grant. And I think Jarvis used a term, I can't remember if it was on the postcast. I think it was on the postcast. Locked On Sports Atlanta, YouTube, check it out. Make sure you subscribe as your second listen. But he used the term volatile. And I thought that was a good way of describing Richie Grant. And going back and rewatching the game, there was, obviously he had the big play. I don't know if the Falcons win this game without him blocking that punt, right? But then there's also a couple of plays where you're like, I don't know what Richie Grant's doing on this play. There was one particular play, and I'll be curious to check this out on the All 22. But watching the television copy, there was the deep shot on the opening play in the fourth quarter of the drive, P and 10, as who was Brady Quinn would say. Was it Mark Sanchez? No, it was Brady Quinn. But on the opening drive after the Falcons got the field goal that took the lead 17-16 on the failed Patterson touchdown catch. But then the Cardinals dialed up a shot play, and it looked like the Falcons were in cover 3 and they were supposed to have a single high safety. And they dialed up a shot play, the Cardinals, that is, to Marquise Brown. And you saw Cornell Armstrong and AJ Terrell sort of racing behind him, and he had beat them deep. Unfortunately, David Blau overthrew Brown on this, but it looked like Grant was supposed to be the single high safety. He bites on the play action fake in the backfield and basically leaves his corners out to dry. And so if this is kind of the volatility, and that comes on the heels of 2 weeks ago where he tried to undercut that deep ball to Rashid Shaheed and did not do a good job, and that led to a 68-yard touchdown. And sort of like, this is something I've talked about before and elsewhere on this podcast and elsewhere, which is like, I feel like Richie Grant is better closer to the line of scrimmage, and plays like these only sort of getting to reaffirm that opinion. And it kind of goes back to a conversation I was having 6 months ago with Mark Schofield about the quarterback class and Desmond Ridder in particular. And we were talking about, I was talking about how watching some of the film of Desmond Ridder at Cincinnati, there was kind of an Alex Smith vibe to him, because like on third downs, it would be like a 3rd and 10. He throws short as sticks for like a 6-yard gain, live to play another series or whatever the case may be. That has not been an issue in the NFL so far. But Mark was kind of talking about the idea when it came to the quarterback position of, it's much easier in theoretically to rein an aggressive guy in rather than trying to rev up a passing guy. And it kind of feels like that with Richie Grant, where he's super aggressive on plays like this, where he's biting on the run action. And so I guess it's better to try to rein that in, right? And part of the thing I think that could help rein that in, or at least hone that sort of aggressiveness, is if the Falcons were playing more of a quarters defense, that cover 4 defense, which may be better suited for an aggressive safety like Richie Grant, particularly when it comes to kind of crashing down on those sort of crossing routes. Particularly, we saw a couple of those in the Arizona game with Trey McBride getting behind the linebackers, and sort of having a guy like Richie Grant would be really good if he's playing quarters, where he can kind of use that aggressiveness to sort of take those out and jump those throws or whatever the case may be. So like, that's something that I think if, we can kind of hone that aggressiveness, with Richie Grant. But it goes back to another conversation I had in the Discord. And again, let me plug, the Discord is a place to hang out, particularly on weekends. We do these Saturday symposiums, which are basically Twitter spaces exclusively for the Locked On Falcons Discord every Saturday at 3 p.m. We've done it pretty much every Saturday this year. We didn't do one on Christmas Eve because the Falcons were playing. We didn't do one after Thanksgiving. We didn't do one the Saturday before week 1, but every other Saturday we do one. We're probably going to do them throughout the off season. So please join the Discord, link in the description below, if you want to be part of those conversations. Gotten a lot of positive feedback for everybody that participated in them. But one of the conversations we were having this past Saturday was talking about, what's a bigger need, what's a bigger priority, safety versus corner. And I kind of said, like, I think safety is a bigger priority than cornerback, not because, basically the idea is like if you basically just ran it back with the roster as is, right? And so you had Hayward and Oliver and Alford and Terrell as your four corners. Like that to me is a better, higher floor. That's a starting point for your corner to build off of that than your safety group if you ran it back with Richie Grant, Eric Harris, Jalen Hawkins, Javante Moffitt, and Micah Abernathy, whoever the Falcons just picked up this week off the practice squad. I feel much better about that quartet of corners, not to mention having Darren Hall in the mix as well, than I do about that quartet of safeties. And so to me, safety is a bigger priority to try to upgrade this offseason. And another thing that kind of emerged watching the Arizona game was there was a rep early on where I can't remember if the Falcons were in man coverage or zone, but Isaiah Oliver was matched up against Trey McBride, and he did a good job covering him. And we all know, one of the things we talked about in yesterday's episode is how well Isaiah Oliver played in this game. But it made something that I remember talking about before. And again, I don't claim ownership over this idea. I'm sure other people are talking about it, but I remember talking before about the idea of, because of Isaiah Oliver's size and his length or whatever, maybe he could be the tight end eraser that I feel like the Falcons need, because I don't think Richie Grant is really ideally suited to be covering these tight ends. Which has been one of his responsibilities this year. And so that may be something that the Falcons can think about, assuming that they re-sign Isaiah Oliver, which I think they should. I'm not one of these people that thinks, we should move Isaiah Oliver to safety. I just think like certain matchups, if and when the Falcons want to play man coverage, put Isaiah Oliver on the tight end versus Grant or Hawkins in those situations. And it's just started me to have like these visions of sort of looking ahead to, some offseason moves that the Falcons can make. Obviously, one of the question marks they have to address is that CB2 spot, right? Do you bring back Casey Hayward, or do you try to upgrade that position, particularly with a younger player early in the draft, right? Obviously, you got to re-sign Isaiah Oliver, but I think you can have Oliver and Alford kind of be sort of co-nickels, right? And depending on the matchup, if you're facing like a big slot like a Chris Godwin, you want to put Oliver out there over D. Alford in that particular game. But if we're facing the Lions next year, right, they got Amon-Ra St. Brown, like you want a little bit more of a quickness there and some speed. So maybe D. Alford's a better matchup there. And in those instances, if the team has, a high-end tight end, which at least based off of the rosters as they stand today, I think it's basically TJ Hawkinson, and that's about it. And maybe Logan Thomas in terms of the guys that we'll be facing, high end tight ends we'll be facing next year. We'll see. Juwan Johnson. Good grief. Anyway, sorry, get distracted. But and then those games you could have Oliver cover that tight end and D. Alford be the nickel in those situations. And so I'm imagining a scenario where we're going to a lot more dime looks next year, where we have four corners in that situation with, whoever that CB2 is, Oliver sort of being the tight end guy, Alford being the slot receiver cover guy, and of course AJ Terrell doing his thing. And then you have two safeties, and I don't have a problem with Richie Grant being one of those two safeties. I would have a bigger issue with Jalen Hawkins probably being one of those two safeties. Not to say that Jalen Hawkins is a waste of space, but I think he's more of a quality reserve player than necessarily a starter. I at least have the belief that if we can kind of rein in Richie Grant's aggressiveness, like that can be honed into being a high quality safety down the road with time and with development. And so that other safety, maybe that's the guy that you trust to be that center fielder that's not going to leave his corners out to dry. I'm looking at maybe, I don't know, Jesse Bates. We're talking about playing guys $15 million a year. Chris Lindstrom's going to get a lot of money. A lot of people think, Deron Page should be that guy. Kaleb McGary be that guy. If anybody's going to get $15 million a year outside of the organization this offseason, I'm sitting here going like, Jesse Bates, although I think the market price based off of the Minkah Fitzpatrick recent extension is like 18 or 19 million a year for an elite safety. But we'll circle back to that during the offseason. So that's what I'm thinking. And we do have a connection to Jesse Bates because our offensive assistant, Steve Jackson, was the Bengals secondary coach the last 2 years before joining the Falcons this year. So, he's intimately familiar with Jesse Bates. So, let's see if Mr. Jackson can lure Mr. Bates here to Atlanta. So that's something to think about as we sort of gear up for the offseason now that we don't have a whole lot to play for. But, we'll be talking a little bit more about this Arizona Cardinal games on tomorrow's All 22. You guys can also provide your feedback via questions that I can answer, via email at lockedonfalcons@mail.com. Leave a comment here on this YouTube channel. hit me up in the Discord. And of course, check us out probably this Saturday again at 3 p.m. Eastern time for that. Of course, social media, Locked On Falcons, and Facebook is a place for that, on Twitter. And I know one question I did get from Twitter was, one listener asked me about tanking and what's my thoughts on sort of tanking. So that will probably be part of tomorrow's conversation, in addition to any sort of film stuff that I want to break down. So really appreciate it, guys. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen. Make it your first listen tomorrow for that all 22 review and mailbag Q&A. And then make your second listen Locked On NFL, or Locked On Sports Atlanta, or Locked On Sports Today, or check out the Bulldogs. Locked On Bulldogs. It's a great listen this week, as those guys get you guys geared up for all the key matchups in the national championship game between the Georgia Bulldogs and the TCU. All glory to the Hypnotoads. So appreciate it, guys. Till then.